Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Shankleberg.
And this is Chris Jackson, and we're going to talk today about what, if anything, we can learn from advertised warranty details for a component or a system.
Yeah, and this comes from a question that came in and said, hey, I'm paraphrasing, but it was, we're having difficulty getting good life data or failure rates from our vendors for our components. Can we use their warranty? He didn't say duration, but can we use their warranty to back calculate out a failure rate? And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. And my first thought is no, it's not really. And it's mostly because, I spent quite a bit of time working with people that were setting warranties in all kinds of different industries. And while the technical time to failure information is an input, it's by no means the most important piece of information that sets the warranty policy and the duration of the warranty. There's all kinds of things that factor into it.
So, what we do know about warranty is that, one, we have some idea about what typical warranty failure probabilities are. We have some idea. So for a warranty period, obviously, that's a period within which the OEM or manufacturer or producer, whatever that organization is called, is essentially on the hook for any failures. And that's why what you're talking about is important, because they need to predict how many failures they'll need to be on the hook for, and that needs to be embedded into profit projections, et cetera, et cetera. And so we do have, let's just call it, some idea about what that warranty failure probability would be by industry. warrantyweek.com is probably as good a source as any regarding what you'd expect by your industry.
Well, you got to be really careful with that, because like the automotive industry, right? Mm-hmm. GM reports they have to report due to our Securities and Exchange Commission rules for publicly traded companies, how much money they spent dealing with warranty claims, and how much money they set aside to deal with future warranty claims.
The accruals.
The accruals, right. Now, GM is a massive company, and they do everything from little itty-bitty, runabouts that are cost $15,000 all the way up to super luxury stuff. And their warranty numbers, and I'm sure they do other things too. They probably sell batteries to somebody else, and they have repair businesses. They have distribution centers. I think they even have banking. All of that stuff gets lumped together into one number. And what Eric Arnhem in Warranty Week will often put into his listings, his articles, is GM's warranty number is GM's. What they include and what they don't include in that number is up to them. There are some vague guidelines from the SEC, what goes into it, but it's up to the company to define what's warranty expense and what's not. And warranty policies also differ. What gets counted and what doesn't get counted. Like the Apple Watch, if you dropped it in water and said, hey, it doesn't work, they'll look at it and go, well, it got dropped in water, we're not going to cover that. And so it's related to reliability, and your assumption, I'm going to be generous, that it's related to what your profit is and all that stuff, is not always a forethought. And it's often just, it's a business decision. Do we want to accept more failures so people think we have a better warranty and we cover it for a longer period of time? Or do we have to because our product's crap and we have to pay for it, this way? Others will create a great product and keep a short warranty because... And then another factor here, Chris, is in Europe, many consumer products are required to have a minimum of a 2-year warranty by law. You can't be anything less than that. So is everything at a 2-year warranty have the exact same failure rate? I doubt it.
Right. So I think fact number one is that we have some idea. I think it's still valid because you talked about General Motors, which is a huge company, but Warranty Week, for example, does deal with very specific componentry, and there are plenty of suppliers out there which focus on, I don't know, just ball bearings or capacitors.
Yeah,
and so there is scope for you to do a bit of research. So I will suggest still say there's some idea, and we know that it could be between 1 to 10% depending on industry as a rule. But as I say to my students, a theory or a theorem is something that we can demonstrate to be true. A rule is something we can't, but it could be useful. So,
okay.
That's why you have, for example, go a little bit off topic, but for those who use damage accumulation models, where we try and work out how something accumulates damage, especially when there's different stresses. There are things like Miner's rule. It's never been proven. Right. It's just a rule that has been used, and in some cases might help you out. But so I think we have some idea. That's the first thing. I think the second fact you mentioned is that companies will only take their predicted warranty failure probabilities into consideration in very different ways. Some companies they're not sophisticated enough or mature enough to even predict what their failure probabilities are. So the failure probability has nothing to do with their warranty period.
Well, I've even had the one where this one company had excellent field prediction. They knew when they design a new product pretty much to the 0.1% what its failure rate is going to be. They had amazing models for all their failure mechanisms. They did all this stuff. They could predict it, and they were, following what the field data was for their existing products, and they were on. They were dead on, and they said, "Can you help us out? Because our finance guys don't seem to understand how to read a Weibull plot, our time to failure plot." And the poor finance guy had this beautiful model, all this financial information, everything else, and failure rate was the key component into this thing. And he'd get this chart. Nobody ever told him how to read it. So he put a number in from the middle. He goes, well, there's the 50th percentile. I'll put that in. It was just completely random what he picked.
Right.
And I said, we only warranties these for 6 months. How about we pick this number over here? And it was an order of magnitude lower failure rate. And he goes, oh, well, that makes a difference.
There you go.
Come on, guys. And I taught him what the formula was. And he says, oh, I can put that in here too. And blah, blah, blah. So if they changed the warranty, it would change the outcome. And I was like, but there's silos in different languages. And yeah, and it is important. I ran in, one of the reasons I really dove deep into reliability is when I was at Hewlett Packard, we had 50, we called them, Dick Moss described the company as 50 loosely affiliated feudal baronies. And they all had their own profit and loss business. They all ran pretty independently, and corporate was pretty small compared to, say GM, for example. But the CEO was doing an all hands presentation and was talking about that we need to be predictable with our quarterly numbers for Wall Street and for all these reasons I don't understand completely. And I said, well, what causes, because I knew firsthand from a number of divisions that one way underestimated their failure rate, and then one of their sister organizations way overestimated their failure rate, and both missed their profits projections dramatically. And it was caused by just not creating a product either way too good or way better than they expected or way worse than they expected. And so we did a quick analysis with some finance folks and found that reliability compared to what the warranty expenses were was a dramatic contributor to the unpredictability of our financial numbers. So
Right.
at that point, then we got a lot of attention saying, oh, geez, we need to actually pay attention to this.
So, fact number one, we have some idea. Fact number two, the extent to which companies take that idea seriously varies remarkably.
Yes,
So,
it does.
I mean, the other, I mean, but going back to, uh, um,
Well, the question, I mean, if you go back to the question, and if we have a 2-year warranty for some part or something that's offered by a company, and we suspect from industry data or like from Warranty Week that industry has a 5%, per year failure rate, you can do a little bit of math and figure out what. I don't get how that connects, because I'd just go to Warranty Week if that gives me a failure rate, essentially, if I know their volume of products.
but you can also put an upper limit to an extent. I mean, if the failure probability is 50%, that company has either or is about to go out of business. One of those two.
Well,
So,
no,
there's an upper
not
limit.
necessarily. I've run into
Oh,
companies
here we
with
go.
that level of failure rate, and they had such a profit margin, they could give you 3 copies of their product before they thought that was excessive. I mean, seriously, they had a medical device that just had an amazing profit margin, and
Right.
they'd ship you a new one in a heartbeat, and it wasn't a cheap product.
So there you go. It's
It varies dramatically, and that's been my personal experience. But let's say you're dealing with capacitors, for example, and capacitors
Yeah.
and diodes and stuff like that.
mass-produced, simple, enduring trends matter. You could, I mean, the simpler the better, because firstly, the simpler it is, the easier it is to come up with better failure probability predictions for your warranty period. So they're firstly more likely to be embedded.
Yeah. See, I
in
wouldn't
that
go to
company's
warranty
calculus.
though, because the capacitors are warranted for a month, so they can get into the production facility and out, and they're looking at, is it damaged in shipping, or is the batch just completely horrendous, and they'll make good on that.
Right, and then we also know that electronic componentry manufacturers use those wonderful things called fits to characterize reliability, which we all know is beyond flawed.
Right. But they don't rarely do component vendors like the discrete individual electronic components. Rarely do they even know what products and markets they're going into. I mean, they have some idea because they do some research to say, oh, we're in consumer products, we're in this or that or the other. They rarely get failure information other than what the assembly house says, hey, these were bent leads, you got to replace them, which is within days of them receiving it usually. But their performance, their long-term performance, unless it's catastrophic, OEMs don't go back to the vendors and say, hey, you need to fix this. Their ongoing fit rate stuff is, well, we shipped 3 billion last month and only heard about 2 failures, so they must be good. The issue is they don't typically hear about failures unless it's a custom one-off for a particular situation. But they also tend to offer very short warranties, and it's really to protect the assemblers and guard them. So if they have a package with a bunch of bent leads in it, they can make that good. But if you have a bad electrolytic capacitor in your radio a year afterwards, that radio manufacturer is probably not going to, one, do the failure analysis to figure out it was that capacitor. And two, is they're not going to go back to the capacitor vendor and say, hey, we want our money back. It costs them more to make the phone call than to get the components redressed.
Right. And a lot of companies know that, which means that they deal with the failure probability and couple that with the likelihood of a customer actually doing what you're talking about.
Yeah. So if you're a reliability engineer and you're working on a product, and I didn't get an idea what industry it was, but the question was, we're having trouble getting life data or failure rates information from our vendors. What can I use warranty? And I said, well, there's lots. Yeah, there's some information there, but it's troubled. How about you do some other stuff, like use similar parts, or do you have that part already in products and use your own history from that, or do this or do that? I mean, what would you advise somebody do if they just they need some reliability information for some components, but the vendor's not cooperative or doesn't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think culturally, a lot of us are. It sounds very bureaucratic to me. I mean, you've been involved with organisations where the main aim is to understand reliability, and that sounds rather arbitrary and rather, ubiquitous and noble, whatever you want to call it. But there are organisations who say they're all about understanding reliability, but if the supplier doesn't give them that information, then they give up. That's just culturally how they roll.
Yeah.
And that's just not good enough, because it's your organisation's name going on that finished system as you sell it and make lots of profit or do whatever you're supposed to do with it. And again, it's just, as opposed to saying, here's steps 1, 2, 3, it's more a mindset where you say you need to own the, let's call it, effort of understanding how reliable these things are. And if your suppliers aren't coming to the table, well, that is a long-term cultural thing you need to address. It starts with making sure your people won't take no for an answer / work it out themselves through testing similar systems or, physics of failure, what have you. But over time, especially if you're going to be dealing with suppliers a lot, it's where you can get ahead of the curve, so to speak, and make sure when you're putting out, if you have an RFT or an RFP or you're looking for vendors in the first place, you select vendors based on their willingness to give you this reliability stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations who say, well, the vendors aren't giving me this data. I asked, well, did you tell them this is part of what they needed to do when you were selecting them? Oh, no. They just said they need to be awesome.
Way after the fact, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a quick fix. It's a cultural shift where the organization prioritizes knowing what the reliability of things are. And so it starts with your supply team. It starts with your designers. It starts with everyone, because it needs to be a collective mindset, which is not the answer you're after, because this
is not going to answer the question. Yeah, if he's got 3 months to get an estimate for this new design, well, you're not going to get there from here.
But it does show that there is potential for our listeners' organisation to say, you know what, we hit this roadblock every single year or every single product. So what do we need to do? And the first thing is change the mindset, prioritise, suppliers who were going to share data, or, create a lab. Because even if the suppliers do provide you data, and even if it's their best attempt to give you that data, if you're using the capacitor in a unique environment, it's potentially irrelevant data. So you need to own the effort of understanding reliability first and foremost. It's not a box you can easily tick, but...
Well, one of the good things is the question was, can I use Mill Handbook 217 instead? And I'm like, oh, geez. Yeah, no.
Well, that's an easy answer.
Yeah.
Answer that one now.
But it's and I ran into this one time years and years ago. I was working with a part of a larger company that made a game system, and the group I was working with did the accessories, like the joystick and the controllers and stuff like that. And then part of that system was a small board. It probably had 8 parts on it that sat inside the game console that was like the Wi-Fi receiver. I think it was Bluetooth, or I don't know what technology it was, but it was the untethered link to the system. And they hadn't changed the design in like 5 years because it just worked. And there was no recorded failure of it in millions of game consoles going out. And so a new reliability engineer joined the console team, and he charged into my office, and said, we need you to prove the reliability of your component. And I need evidence that it's good. I said, do you have any evidence that it's ever failed? No. Okay, I'm done now. But he wanted me to run a test with 99% confidence that I was above the target value that they'd set, which was like 1 failure per billion or something like that. He had allocated out a target for this thing. And I said, I can't possibly meet that requirement. And I don't have to.
Yeah. It's, again, confidence is a measure of you. It's not a measure of your device or item.
So I told him to get the hell out of my office. And then the next second, my director comes walking in and says, what did you piss off? What's his name for? He's kind of like your boss. And he goes, no, he isn't. He's an idiot. And here's why. And I showed him the math. He goes, okay, let me go talk to him. But
yeah.
At some point, you got to figure out what you need to know. I think that's my basic thing is, do you need to know the failure rate to the 15th degree for every single component in your system? No, because even if you did, you're still going to get it wrong. And you're going to be surprised by something that you just really nobody ever could have expected.
Right. And you might have, let's say 10 components. Most systems have way more than 10 components. Mm-hmm. But you don't need, one of those components is going to be much more reliable than the rest.
Yeah.
It just is. You don't need to know its failure probability to 15 decimal points, because that is going to be lost in the noise of any uncertainties you have in the estimates of your most dominant failure mechanisms. And so there's no point. I don't know if it's relevant, but I will launch on a story where you know which client I'm talking about, where they want to have a good understanding of reliability out to an extraordinarily long time frame. Mm-hmm. And the item in question is actually going to be maintained in really controlled, really nice environments for that reason. So the challenge then becomes, how do we accelerate failure in an aging context in a way that allows us to get confidence that this thing is going to last that long? And a lot of the previous people they engaged before me, they couldn't do it because their perspective was all about trying to accelerate and then extrapolate back to storage conditions. Mm-hmm. And what I proposed was, let's accelerate. That often doesn't work because, for example, if you turn up voltage, well, voltage will accelerate failure mechanisms, but there's going to be 0 volts applied to our device in storage conditions.
Yeah,
so
dividing by 0 kind of doesn't work.
Doesn't work. But what if we were to crank up voltage, and I'm using voltage as an example,
right,
but then be able to say, you know what, we cranked up the voltage, got an accelerated life model, and that meant that we could say with 99% confidence that this thing would last the centuries in question at 2 volts. So if we had 2 volts going through it continuously, then if we were able to demonstrate it's going to last, I'll just pick a random number, 200 years, with 2 volts going through that device, you'd be able to say with some confidence, therefore, we are really confident when there's no voltage going through it, it's going to be lasting longer than 200 years. And so you're not extrapolating back to the at-use conditions, but you're creating an environment, boundary conditions.
Yeah.
That is one way of generating confidence we otherwise couldn't.
I know you're using voltage, and there's no voltage in use. The issue I had is the failure mechanisms that we walk around here and now and deal with over the next 5-10 years are different. The failure mechanisms that, like dielectric breakdown. Yeah, under 0 volts, it's pretty common that you won't have dielectric breakdown, because if you don't apply voltage to it, it just won't happen. But eventually they want to apply voltage to this. And is the mechanism excited by voltage, or is it's the punch through is caused by voltage, but does the dielectric degrade in some other chemical way that voltage has nothing to do with its acceleration?
Oh, and that's a whole podcast in its own right, and I don't disagree with it, but with what you're saying.
But you have to be careful about thinking through, well, what mechanisms are you interested in, and what, and then picking the rights. And the concept you just outlined of saying, well, I can bound this is a way to do that. Right. But I'm going to go back to the original question: because they offer a 10-year warranty on it, does it mean anything that the product will last to 10 years in your application? There's not a very low failure rate associated with that. you probably need to do a little bit more thinking and work to it. And I think more along the lines what you're talking about, Chris, is you got to change the culture. You got to start take ownership of you really need to own this information, whether it's contracting with suppliers, partnering with them to do testing, doing testing on your in-house, use your field data. There's lots of ways you can get this number, but none of them are give them a phone call and they give you the appropriate number.
Right. Because vendors can be, sometimes understandably, sometimes not so understandably, they can be cagey with information they give off. And they might because they've had a bad experience with one of their clients where that data was used against them in a so-called court of law, and that's to be understood.
Yeah.
But if you have it up front in your client selection process, hey, we need you to provide data. Here's why. It's what we're going to do with it. It starts generating confidence. It also allows you to exclude suppliers who just aren't interested in doing that. Because if reliability is important, then that's not a vendor who's going to help you get that all-important understanding of reliability.
And they're most likely not going to create a reliable product at the end of the day. It's going to have all kinds of issues, but that might be a whole nother podcast on that.
Oh, I think we've touched on 3 potential podcast episodes.
I know, we should take notes here sometime. So if you're listening to this and one of those 3 or more topics that we touched on that you'd be interested in, let us know. I didn't take notes on all of them. Or if you have something else on your mind or a question like what we received on this one. And this question came through, I think it was through LinkedIn, if I remember right. But that's one of 3 different ways you can get in touch with us. You can go over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR, or you can go to LinkedIn for Chris or I or the other hosts of the show, or you could go to our About pages. There's lots of ways for you to get in touch. And the benefit is you get an answer. It might be a quick response and give you some more references or something to think about or a direction or an answer from our experience. But then stay tuned because it may well end up on as a podcast and we'll spend 20 minutes or so chatting about it, going a little bit deeper into a response for you. So please do get in touch. It does make the show and the topics we talk about, at least in my mind, relevant to what you're interested in. So that's one way for you to participate. Yeah. So with that, Chris, I think we'll have to sit here with bated breath waiting for the list of topics that we touched on to come back up, unless you remember them. But we'll see what happens.
Funny we had like pencils or paper or things like that we could use. I don't know.
Oh, we recorded it. What am I thinking? We can just play it back.
Fair enough.
There you go. All right. Thanks, Chris. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Fred. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.